Lamar Jackson sent a message to his doubters and haters, and a Ravens offensive lineman took a clear stance on the MVP conversation. All that and more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here today during the new year. We are officially in a new year, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen each and every single day. We are free and available for you, of course, on all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube, where you can like and subscribe. Also in audio form, where you can follow along and subscribe as well. We're a 5-day-a-week Ravens podcast, Monday through Friday, bringing your Ravens content. Plus, we do bonus episodes. We go live after every single Ravens game and every single piece of big news. So if you want that daily Ravens coverage, be sure to keep it locked in here on Locked On Ravens. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet. You will start it with $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Happy 2025. Happy New Year. Hopefully everybody had a wonderful New Year's Eve leading into the new year. It is still so crazy to say 2025. We are now in between 2020 and 2030. Lamar Jackson's MVP in 2019. By the time that thing gets awarded in 2025, it's crazy how many years it's been since that. We have been through a ton here on this show on Locked On Ravens. I mean, I started the show up in 2019. Now it's already 2025. Like that's crazy how the time has flown by, much like the time has flown by this season already in week 18, 1 week before the playoffs begin. And on today's show, in the final part, we'll get to some of that because I do think the Ravens got the short end of the stick this week. So more details on that to come. But in the first part of the show, Lamar Jackson sent a message to his doubters. And I want to talk about Lamar's mindset throughout the season as well, because I think that ties in really well to this conversation and how Lamar has performed this season as a whole. And then it's everybody's favorite topic. It's that MVP conversation. And for being honest, it kind of feels like the MVP conversation with just how often it's being talked about and how often it's the biggest headline. Feels like Lamar Jackson's extension situation a couple of years ago, where it felt like that was every single show. We were going into detail on it. But hey, we do the biggest headlines. We talk about those, and we're going to talk about it. Baltimore Ravens offensive lineman took a stance, backed up his quarterback. We'll talk about that in the second part of the show. But let's first get into what Lamar Jackson had to say to his doubters and his haters. Again, the Ravens on a weird schedule this week. It's been a while since they played on a Sunday, actually, right? We've got Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday again. So the Ravens, everything is sped up. So Lamar Jackson, instead of speaking on Wednesday, spoke on Tuesday on New Year's Eve. And he was asked on if his doubters and the haters, they still motivate him in his 7th season in the league. And he said, yes, there's really nothing to talk about for real. Just let us play football. But it is what it is. It's always going to be like that. When you're playing sports, there's always going to be talk of how good a player is, how bad a player is. He should be this or he should be that. It's going to always be that type of talk. So it is what it is. Just keep it up for me. It helps. It helps, right? That's the conversation here for Lamar. That whole thing. Oh, it helps. Keep it up. Keep it up for me. It's interesting because I think different people handle criticism differently, and different people respond to criticism differently, or, people who doubt, people who hate. And to me, the way that Lamar handles it is he goes out there and he shows it on the field himself. Now, there will be times on social media where he will respond, and I have no problem with that personally. I think he has every right to do that. I know some people do. I don't really understand why people don't like that from Lamar. I think he has a right to defend himself, just like everybody has a right to defend themselves. But we know the story with Lamar in the criticism, the hates, the doubters. This goes back to Louisville with him. This goes to the NFL draft. This goes to his first couple years in the league. This even goes to this season, right? It just feels like there's always something with Lamar. And part of that to me is honestly, I just don't think some people want to be wrong about him. because we know the narratives coming out of school for Lamar. It was, oh, he needs to be a wide receiver, or he doesn't have the talent to play quarterback. He's more of an athlete, or all of those disrespectful narratives that teams, even NFL teams, were trying to push. Executives, analysts, a lot of people were trying to push those narratives on Lamar Jackson. And, Lamar doesn't forget about that. If I'm Lamar, I wouldn't forget about that. That would motivate me. And it's a certain point. I do believe Lamar, he knows this. I think we all know Lamar knows this, that he doesn't listen to that stuff in terms of, oh, it's going to get to me, right? I don't think it gets to Lamar Jackson, but I do think it can be a motivating factor, and it is a motivating factor. And so there was a lot of conversation, like, let's go back to the offseason, where a lot of people were talking about Lamar's body transformation. And if you listen to Locked On Ravens, if you're an everydayer on Locked On Ravens and you listen to my commentary on it, I loved it. I loved that Lamar made the choice to go back to a playing weight and a body that he felt the most comfortable in, because it felt like the year prior, despite winning the MVP, he wasn't comfortable. But all the narratives were, oh, he's going to get injured, or can he really do that with that type of body? Meanwhile, in 2019, he literally won being skinny Lamar, but okay. But I digress. It's about him. People say, oh, he can't throw the football, this, that. It's when one thing gets proven wrong from Lamar, another narrative pops up. And I think we all saw how seriously Lamar took the whole Mike Florio situation right back last year, the Christmas game with San Francisco, how that wasn't even about Lamar specifically. Like, that was more of a Ravens thing where Mike Florio was just bashing on the Ravens. And I think that Lamar's energy with all of that rubs off on the team in a good way, right? I think it motivates them. And you can't get too caught up in it, and I don't believe Lamar does. I don't believe the Ravens do. The Ravens are very much we're going to just do our thing within the organization. We're not going to let anybody influence anything that we do. And I believe that's how it should be, if we're being honest. But for Lamar, it's just been a different type of criticism for him over the course of his career, where my thing that I've been saying for years is Lamar's mistakes are magnified and his successes, while widely celebrated, there are some people who don't celebrate them. And I think you can talk about it in the MVP sense, you can talk about it from a playoff sense, you can talk about it from a record sense, whatever positive or negative narrative there is about Lamar Jackson. It feels like everybody just screams playoffs now for Lamar because, oh, well, can't throw the ball. That was never true to begin with. And by the way, oh, yeah, he can throw it. Who could have guessed? Who could have guessed? Of course, he could always throw the football. That was ridiculous in the first place. Or, oh, well, he's a running back. Another disrespectful narrative. And now we hear about other quarterbacks who have that dual threat ability. I don't hear those guys being called running backs, but Lamar is for some reason. Again, it's that thing. So for Lamar to say that it helps, I think he does take that stuff to heart, not in terms of to heart like, oh, man, is this really what people think of me? Or am I really like that? No, Lamar believes in himself. The Ravens believe in him. That's all they need. All that Lamar needs is himself to believe in him, his coaches, his teammates, him and his family, the people around him, and his fans, right? He doesn't need haters to, validate him. Lamar knows who he is. But I think it's really cool that in a social media world, in a world where everything is so accessible and, you can find stuff in a click, you can talk about things here, you can see this there. I don't think Lamar lets it affect him. Honestly, if you're talking about it affecting him, I would probably say it affects him in a positive way, like we've been talking about here. So there's a lot that you can say about Lamar. And look, if you want to bring up the playoff record and the performances there, first of all, if you want to talk about playoff stuff, a lot of people forget that he had that game in the divisional round against the Texans last season. It did happen. Now, in terms of getting to the Super Bowl, yeah, he hasn't gotten the job done, right? We can all admit that. He didn't play well enough in the Kansas City game, for sure. But in that Tennessee loss in 2019, he had 500 total yards, and he was able to beat up on the Titans the next year in that revenge game, 2021. So it's just a matter of being able to, I guess, understand the greatness of Lamar while kind of just appreciating it. If you doubt Lamar, if you hate Lamar, I don't understand why. He's humble, he's kind off the field, he's a beast on it. That's the type of player that I think is really easy to root for, in my opinion. But again, I think it all comes back to some people just want to be right and don't want to be wrong about Lamar. So they'll make up those narratives or they'll push negative ones for this, that, and the other. But Lamar takes that and he fuels it in a good way. And some players don't do that. Some players will lash out. Some players will let it get to them, and that impacts their play on the field. But I think Lamar, he does a lot of good with it. And the fact that he said, hey, just keep it up for me, it helps. I think that's a message that maybe is a little scary. I don't know what the word would be, but maybe the word I'll use is scary because he's already a guy that can dominate. If you give him that motivation, he might go out there and carve you up for 60 minutes, and there's nothing you can do about it. But coming up in the second part of the show, the MVP conversation, it's been all over the place, and it's going to be talked about more here on Locked On Ravens because we'll talk about a Ravens offensive lineman sticking up for his quarterback. So be sure to stay tuned. A lot to get to on Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers have finished the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W. I love betting on which players will score a touchdown and how many points each team will score. It's thrilling. And not only can you bet on who will win the game, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points each team will score, and so much more. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. We're back for our second segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you on this Wednesday edition, on this 2025 edition of Locked On Ravens, first 2025 edition of the year. We have a lot more 2025 editions coming up over the course of this next calendar year. We have a lot of Ravens talk, obviously. Big playoff run coming up for the Ravens, but we do not go away during the offseason. We are 5 days a week, through and through, year-round. So tell a friend, tell a family member if they want Ravens coverage during the season, Ravens coverage in the offseason every single weekday, plus more. Be sure to like and subscribe in video form, follow along in audio form as well. Now, we've heard a lot of different people take different sides in the MVP conversation, analysts, coaches, players, whoever you want to throw in that conversation. And we've heard guys like Spencer Brown of the Bills, Sean McDermott of the Bills, go to bat for their player in Josh Allen. We're now starting to get that more and more from Ravens coaches and players. We talked on yesterday's show about what John Harbaugh had to say, how he defended his quarterback. So if you haven't checked out yesterday's episode, last of 2024, check that one out. But we had a Ravens offensive lineman in Mr. Tyler Linderbaum, the anchor in the middle of that group, defending his quarterback about the MVP conversation and if he deserves it. And obviously, Tyler Linderbaum said yes. He was asked if Lamar should win the MVP, and he said, yes, absolutely. I get to see Lamar every day and the things he's able to do and then carrying it over to the game. He's just a special player. He's extremely fun to play with, just the things he's able to do, and think there's no one more deserving of that award than Lamar Jackson. And for Tyler Linderbaum, I know that it's different playing with Lamar Jackson in a good way. I think it's a interesting adjustment for guys. I think that's been talked about a little bit, but I think that, if I was out there on the field with Lamar, I'd be having fun playing with him, but that's not the obvious, that's not the reason a guy wins MVP. A guy doesn't win MVP because he's fun to play with. A guy wins MVP because he is the most valuable player on his team and in the league, right? So for Lamar, obviously the conversation is with Josh Allen, and I know there's been a lot brought up about the stats and how last year the stats didn't matter, but this year they do. It wasn't that stats didn't matter last season. It's not that they do this season. But when you talk about the conversation, it's a bunch of different factors. Part of that is the eye test. And I feel like a lot of people are only giving Lamar the stats, right? Which is true. Like, that's what it is. Lamar has the stats over Josh Allen. But then I think when you talk about eye test and, oh, this guy's had the most value on his team, everybody's just assuming that's Josh Allen. And look, I'm not saying Josh doesn't have impact. Oh, he absolutely does. He's one of the most impactful players in the league. But as is Lamar Jackson, and I feel like it's because of the narratives that were going in Buffalo's, not in Buffalo's favor. They weren't good for Buffalo during the offseason, which was they lost Stephon Diggs. They lost a lot of defensive playmakers. Gabe Davis left as well. And a lot of people thought, oh, this is going to be somewhat of a rebuild year for the Bills, or maybe a step back year for the Bills. And credit to Josh Allen, credit to the Bills. They've had a great season. They've had a really good season. But it feels like Lamar is being punished for having Derrick Henry on his side. It feels like Lamar is being punished for having wide receivers that separate. And here's the other part of the conversation with wide receiver separation. There are a couple of different ways that you can measure separation. I know there are different stats for different ways you can measure it, but one of the things that makes Lamar so great is the fact that he can escape and scramble so effectively. Again, Josh Allen can do that. But what I'm trying to say is that a lot of these things that both quarterbacks can do, only one of them is getting full credit for it, or having that narrative pushed about them. Which is like, okay, we can admit that Josh is a really good quarterback. We can admit that he does all these things and has impact and has scramblability and is a really good player, as is Lamar Jackson. But with wide receiver separation, Lamar floats in that pocket, gives his wide receivers time to separate off of those defenders multiple times, work back to him. Again, there are different ways to measure it, right? Initial separation, all this different stuff. I'm talking about, let's imagine Lamar didn't have the escapability he had. And he has to take sacks on a lot of these plays where he is improvising. And that's a big difference in statistical numbers, in probably a couple of Ravens wins, right? I think the Ravens probably lose a couple games if Lamar can't get out of some sacks that defenders have him right there and he's able to escape, make magic happen, as does Josh Allen. That's the conversation. That's why it's so close for me, where I do believe it's Lamar's award. But if you told me that Josh won it, I would be like, well, I mean, it makes sense. It makes sense. He had a great year. But I believe Lamar is the MVP. A lot of people believe Josh is the MVP. But I just think that, again, like a Dan Orlovsky, for example, calling the race when it was 4 weeks before the season ended, Lamar had 2 big games left on the schedule. That was disingenuous. And I know Orlovsky apologized for that and walked back those comments. But you look at some of the other conversations around the league, around circles, and it's that, yes, Lamar Jackson has a better supporting cast than Josh Allen does this season. And you can talk about the record in the seeding. Those conversations to me are real with Joe Burrow. Those conversations are real to me with him. Because even if the Bengals make the playoffs as the 7th seed, you cannot give the MVP to the 7th seed. If the Ravens if they lose the division and are in the 5 seed, Josh Allen wins the award. That's just it. Because the difference between the 2 seed and the 3 seed to me is not that big of a deal. Like, I think 1 seed, 2 losses, that difference is not a big enough deal to overlook the other aspects like stats and other things, efficiency and whatnot, that I believe go in Lamar's favor. But if this is a wild card team and Josh has the year he has and the Ravens are the 5 seed, then that argument is real, much like it is real with Joe Burrow. But we're not operating in that timeline right now because what happened last week? The Ravens took control of the AFC North. The Ravens also have the head-to-head, and we talked with Qadri Ismail earlier this week. And he said on yesterday's show that, well, hold on a second. Lamar and Josh Allen played head-to-head. And he said, I don't care when. It happened. And Lamar had a better game, this, that, and the other. And so he wasn't in favor of co-MVPs. I'm not really either, if being honest. I mean, I say it should be Lamar by himself. And if Josh wins it, should probably be Josh by himself. But it's the narrative spinning by a lot of outlets, even NFL media, other media places, CBS Sports, where you're talking about the calendar year touchdowns, even including playoffs last season and from 2023. Like, what does that have to do with any? Like, yes, it's the calendar year. The calendar year is over now. Like, I get it's a New Year's tweet and everything, but, that to me was a little like, oh, okay, we're really putting this out there now. Obviously, there was the arm punt situation. Tony Romo talking about how you feel bad for the guy who has no MVP, so give it to him. Those are all things that if I'm Josh, I've said this. If you're an everyday, you've heard me say this. I'm just like, if I'm Josh, I'm mad about that. I'm like, don't give me the award because you feel bad for me. Give me the award because you believe I deserved it. And that's been my whole point this entire time. It's give the award to the guy that deserves it. If it's Lamar Jackson, if it's Josh Allen, okay. But for, again, the MVP race being called and all this different type of stuff, it just, for two players that are having such good seasons and that honestly have a lot of respect for each other, I think the conversation has really taken on a life of its own and gone to a place where a lot of people might not have expected it to. But it just feels like there are all these goalposts being moved, and I just feel like it should be more of a I don't even know how to put it. It should be more conversation about the play that's happening and less conversation about, oh, well, this is what MVP means versus this is what Offensive Player of the Year means, and all that type of conversation too, because both players are incredible. I mean, look, if either of them wasn't having the season that they were having, the other one would be the runaway MVP favorite by 10 million miles. But they're having the same year this year. We know Lamar's passer rating, and he has a chance to have the highest single-season passer rating in NFL history, and all those other guys have won the award. So you'd be making history if you didn't give the award to Lamar after that. Even if he finishes within the top 4, top 5, all those guys won MVP. So we'll see what ends up happening. But again, it's such a hot topic right now. It feels like there's a new thing coming out each and every day. But we know Tyler Linderbaum, he supports his guy in Lamar Jackson. And that whole offensive line, by the way, got to give him a lot of credit. Obviously, Lamar's talked about the award, and he's said how it's an honor to win it. And he's focused on Super Bowls. But he also said it's a team award, right? It's a team award. And he credits the offensive line, credits his wide receivers, his coaching staff. It's a whole team thing for Lamar, and that I think is really, really cool. And then what John Harbaugh said about it, and we talked about this yesterday, was that, it's you don't really hear anybody talking about it. You don't hear Lamar talking about it. They just want to win the next game. That's what the Ravens' mindset is. They just want to win the next game. That's exactly how they should approach it. Because look, MVP, it's cool, it's fun, but at the end of the day, that does not matter when it comes to the Super Bowl, right? Super Bowl, you win that. That's what matters. Lamar would trade all 3 of his MVPs, hypothetically, I guess, right? 2 MVPs, hypothetically 3 for a Super Bowl. That is the goal for the Ravens. And that starts week 18. Got to pick up a win against the Browns to win your division. So coming up, we'll talk about how the Ravens got the short end of the stick this week. So be sure to stay tuned. Lots to get to on Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by PrizePicks. It's playoff time, and if you're like me, you want to make the most of these final weeks of football action. That's where PrizePicks comes in. If you love football and want a chance to win real money while watching the games, PrizePicks is the place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With PrizePicks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns, and for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money, you can make your picks in less than 60 seconds. And whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or want to cash out quickly, PrizePicks has got you covered. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings, it's clear that people are loving this platform. I've been playing for a while now, and I'm having a blast this week. I'm eyeing Jared Goff for more than 230 passing yards and Saquon Barkley for more than 1 touchdown, assuming he plays. It's so easy to use, and I love how fast the payouts are. Seriously, I've gotten paid out in as little as 15 minutes when my picks hit. Plus, the weekly promos like Taco Tuesday discounts add even more value to my lineups. Here's a special offer for Locked On NFL listeners. Download the app today. Use code Locked On NFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's PrizePicks. Run your game. Download the app today. Use code Locked On NFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks. Run your game. We're back, Locked On Ravens, final segment of the first episode of 2025. And it's crazy. Kevin Oestreicher here with you. We've been through a lot in 2024, right? We're going to leave that all in the past, all right? The Ravens have not lost this year. Yeah, right? Hey, it's a fact. I'm not lying there. Obviously, 2024 started off with disappointment in the playoffs for Baltimore. They had an up and down season, but now there is one more game, and then the Ravens playoff run begins. Be sure to hit like and subscribe in video form, follow along in audio form here on the show. I have a lot planned here in 2025. I'm honestly really excited. I've been thinking about it for a while. really excited for where the show is going. We're going to do a whole background revamp this off season, and obviously a bunch more Ravens content coming your way, trying to improve the show each and every day, graphics wise, and everything that we can do this year. I mean, it doesn't happen without the support of everybody who tunes in, watches, listens. We've built such great communities, and reflecting back on this show and how it's grown, we reached so many awesome milestones here on Locked On Ravens in 2024. 10,000 subscribers was my big goal, the first one at least, and we hit that right before the year ended. We had a couple of episodes that went over 30,000, 20,000 views on YouTube and an audio form, a bunch of ones that were super popular as well. And, almost to 40,000 followers on Twitter, which it's been amazing to see that community grow. Starting on my Instagram for the 18 millionth time, so you can follow me over there at ChaosStriker34 and everything. I know I'm kind of rambling a little bit about that, but all the support truly means the world for me, and I can't wait to keep it going here in 2025. Now, I do believe Baltimore got the short end of the stick in Week 18 between the Ravens and the Browns here, and I'll explain to you why. We know the Ravens haven't played on Sunday in a while, as I mentioned a little earlier, which is true. Ravens are coming off of a 3-game and 11-day stretch where, look, they aced that test with flying colors. I don't think you could have imagined a better 3-game and 11-day stretch for a team, especially because we saw how a couple of them went for the Ravens' fellow NFL teams like Pittsburgh. But Baltimore did a great job. But here's how this whole situation worked out. The NFL scheduled the Ravens to play on Saturday at 4:30. The Steelers and Bengals will play right after the Ravens and Browns do at 8 p.m. on Saturday. So obviously the Ravens played on Wednesday. That's already a shorter week than it would have been to give them the extra day of rest to go from Wednesday to Sunday. So the Ravens now have just the typical, let's just throw a scenario out there. We know when Thursday night games happen, those are Thursday to the next Sunday breaks. That's essentially what the Ravens have now with Wednesday to the next Saturday. Just move everything up a day. But the other thing is that the Ravens actually lose the rest advantage with Pittsburgh because Pittsburgh played earlier than the Ravens did on Christmas. They had the game before Baltimore at the Chiefs, and they will play later than the Ravens this upcoming Saturday. So give or take, it's not a huge, massive difference. It's only about, 6 hours or so. But, I mean, regardless, the Ravens did get the short end of the stick here. And I would have hoped that the NFL, honestly, just from a scheduling perspective, I don't love this because I feel like the Ravens and the Steelers should play at the same time. I don't think the Steelers should have the advantage of knowing what happens to the Ravens. And honestly, the NFL could have put the Ravens after. They didn't want to do this for the reason I'm about to say, but they could have put the Ravens after the Steelers because the Ravens would know if they would have anything to play for. Because if the Steelers, let's flip-flop the games. Steelers, Bengals at 4:30, Ravens, Browns at 8. If the Steelers lost to the Bengals before the Ravens played, the Ravens would be locked into the 3 seed. So they wouldn't have to play anybody. They could rest their starters and gear up for their next opponent. But if the Steelers won, they would have known, oh, hey, we actually have to play our guys now because if we lose, then we lose the division. But honestly, the Ravens, they'll have a shot to lock up the division. It's a little, I don't know if the word's frustrating. I'll say disappointing. It's disappointing that the Ravens didn't get the rest advantage or that the NFL kind of did this to them, even for scheduling purposes. But the Ravens should take care of business. It is a massive, massive spread over on FanDuel. I mean, the Ravens are favored by a whole heck of a lot. It's like that Space Jam where with the Monstars and everything, it's like a lot to a little. That's what it was with the spread. It feels that way. But the Ravens have come out of this, knock on wood, there it is, decently healthy. I know there's a illness that's kind of running through the team right now, so hopefully everybody's good there. But the Ravens are pretty healthy heading into this week. And again, they've been healthy up to this point. I'm not jinxing anything, by the way. I'm not jinxing it. So don't put that on me. Don't put it on me. I'm just saying a fact, which is they have been healthy up to this point. So hopefully that can continue. We've had plenty of injury derailed seasons here in Baltimore, and now you're in a mode where if a guy gets hurt, they're in jeopardy of missing playoff games. And if it's a month injury, their season is over. Instead of it being September, they can come back in October. Well, if you get injured now and it's a month, coming back at the Super Bowl if you're lucky. So Big Week 18 game upcoming for the Ravens. They have to take care of business, and they cannot fall into another trap situation like they did the first time they played the Browns. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in again. Happy New Year to everybody out there on the way out. Hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. Follow along and subscribe in audio form as well. Same show, both audio and video. Coming up tomorrow, more Ravens content. We'll start to flip the page to Week 18 fully. Talk a little bit about that Browns-Ravens matchup, and of course, playoff implications. We'll talk MVP, I'm sure, Lamar Jackson and the whole 9 yards. So be sure to stay tuned, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.